This is Deep Dive. I'm Li Yunqi. The brutal murder of a 13-year-old boy in North China's Hebei province has sparked a nationwide cry for justice. Identified only by his last name, Wang, the student's mutilated body was discovered buried in an abandoned vegetable greenhouse. 3 teenagers have been taken into police custody on suspicion of murdering their classmate. Police had swiftly formed a specialized task force of over 60 personnel, committing to a thorough investigation of the crime. For the past 2 weeks, the whole nation's eyes have been fixed on this small village near the city of Handan. Many are advocating for harsh penalties for the perpetrators. However, considering the suspects' ages, even if convicted, they may still receive leniency under Chinese laws. What circumstances led to the horrific killing of this young boy? What punishments will these young offenders face? And most importantly, what lessons can we take from this tragedy to curb youth crime in the future? To delve into these questions, I spoke with my colleague Dou Hongyu. This episode is brought to you on Sunday, March the 24th. It's a grisly crime on a 13-year-old. And Hongyu, what do we know about the suspects and the victims so far?
The victim and the 3 suspects are classmates. And according to the victim's family, he left home at about 1 p.m. on March the 10th. He said he was going to hang out with classmates. But by the time of 5 p.m., his family found that his phone was irresponsive. So his relatives started to search frantically. They went to the houses of his classmates, which included the 3 suspects now in detention. But all of them denied having seen him. And then the police got involved. They found in the surveillance footage that the victim was on a scooter surrounded by the 3 classmates. And the next day, the victim's father logged into his son's WeChat account, and he found that all his money was transferred to one of the 3 classmates. And with the transfer record and with the surveillance footage, 2 of the suspects broke down and admitted the victim had been killed and buried in the greenhouse. People found that his face was disfigured. And according to his uncle, it looked like his face was stamped by shovels used to bury him.
What's the latest update on the investigation?
According to policeman Li Yafeng, the 3 suspects dug the hole twice. They started digging the day before the murder, and on the day of killing, they dug again. So obviously this is an intentional homicide. And an autopsy revealed that he suffered severe injuries to the head and the back. After just the first couple of days of the murder, there was a rumor on the internet saying that the pit was 2 meters deep. People tended to believe that there had been adults engaged in this crime. But according to this policeman,
they
measured the hole and it was about 56 centimeters deep, about half a meter. And so far there's no evidence showing the participation of any adults. But even today, there are always voices on the internet saying that there might be adults in this incident. Some of them may not be able to believe that the 3 kids can conduct such gruesome killing.
And this case has triggered a particular outrage in the public in China. What are people's focus and questions on this case?
The first thing they're focusing on is that this is an attempted murder. If the killing was totally out of impulse, they might have gained a little more understanding from the public, because we know that teenagers are prone to be affected by their changing hormone levels and their behaviors are sometimes unpredictable. But their deliberate planning and their brutal actions are way beyond people's imagination of what's the most horrifying things kids can do. And the public is also shocked by how poised they were. They even went to school as nothing happened after the murder. So it is this kind of attitude that infuriated the whole nation. And the second thing is that now everybody is feeling related to this incident. There are some parents saying on the internet that I have kids, so I cannot stay silent.
Right.
There are also young people saying that whether they will have children is largely dependent on the verdict of this case, because they don't want to have their children born in the society where young killers are not severely punished. And this brings out one of the major reasons of the public anger. People are afraid that they will not be punished as expected because previous cases have shown that China's legal system is protective of adolescent suspects. For instance, in 2013, a 10-year-old girl beat a 1-year-old baby and dropped it off the 25th floor. No criminal charges. And last year, a 7-year-old threw a 4-year-old boy in a well with water. No criminal charges. And also last year, an 11-year-old boy killed a 4-year-old girl. He only faced a few months of psychological correction. So the public is angry about such results, and they do not want the 3 young killers to escape harsh punishment again.
Right, because the age of the suspects seems to be a very contentious point among the public.
Exactly.
There are people that have expressed fury and hoping that these 3 suspects will get a severe verdict, even death penalty. But there may be some extent of leniency based on the current criminal law for underage minors. And in this case, what's the outlook on the punishment that these suspects may get?
Well, first of all, the death penalty that has been called for by the public has been crossed out because under the Chinese law, the death penalty shall not be applied to people under the age of 18. According to China's criminal law, children between the age of 12 and 14 can face criminal prosecution for certain crimes, which of course includes intentional homicide. But there's a prerequisite. The prosecution has to be allowed by the country's highest public prosecutor. And earlier this week, the head of the highest prosecuting office, Ying Yong, said that juveniles should be held criminally liable in line with the law if they commit severe crimes. This is a kind of attitude shown to the public, and it's very likely that the 3 young suspects will face criminal punishment. The most severe situation for them is life imprisonment, but also according to the criminal law, adolescent criminals should have lighter penalty. So there are guesses that they may face 8 to 20 years in prison. And this is also determined by other factors, like who's the principal offender and who's the accessory. When this result is published to the society, people will get angry again. They won't buy it. And this is a typical occasion when the popular sense of justice contradicts with the law. Although people may get frustrated, it's already much better than a few years ago because if it happened before 2021, none of the 3 suspects would get criminal penalty because before that, China's criminal age was 14 and the 3 kids were below 14. But in 2021, it was lowered to 12, which was prompted by many previous cases that ignited debates on how young is too young to lock up. Then China's legislators were convinced that young children between 12 and 14 also have the abilities to commit serious crimes. So the recent killing of the boy will probably be the very first case where the amended clause would be applied. So now the whole nation is watching how it'll turn out.
So in general, the current criminal law in China is still prone to giving second chances or be more lenient to young offenders.
Yes.
And outside of China, how do other countries deal with juvenile offenders and other practices that have been proven effective on regulating youth crime?
Well, the situation differs from one country to another. In China, there has been discussions of one of the practices that many people think may be useful in China. That is called malice applies to the want of age, which is a method used in the United States and the UK. It means that if there's enough evidence to prove that the juvenile offender is sufficiently mature to understand the nature and the consequence of his deed of crime, he would not be protected. Now, there are already academic discussions on the localization of this method in China. Many of them say that now the legal procedure is kind of more fixed in China, and this method will make this legal procedure more flexible. Now China is applying the civil law system, which is more formalized and more based on codified laws. That is part of the reason why some young kids would take advantage of their age to do bad things. If we take intention into consideration, that may help to solve the problem. But there are also people arguing that the process of determining the intention itself can be quite subjective. It needs more evidence. It might be more suitable for the US and the UK than for China, because these two countries are applying the common law system, which relies on judicial decisions and precedents set by courts. But in this case, the lawyers are playing a much more crucial role. So that will give rich people an edge, which may lead to more unfairness. So this is the criminal age and how the courts would treat young offenders is a headache for the whole world.
And another concern is how we can reduce and prevent juvenile crimes in the future. Because there's a white paper released from last year that shows that youth crime in China has been on the rise from the year 2020 to 2022. And there are also more offenders from the younger age group. And in this case, there are indications that the victim had long been bullied by the three suspects. And currently, there's no conclusion yet to whether the murder was an escalated act of bullying, but many people tend to believe there's a strong correlation between them. And is school bullying a common problem in China? And also for this victim, did he receive any help or did he seek any help while he was bullied?
First, in this case, no intervention has been shown in the whole story. The victim's aunt went to his school. The principal said the death was a total accident, and he said the teacher was quite responsible and there were no bullies at all. But when one of his classmates took the interview from reporters, she said the three suspects had repeatedly locked the boy in a shed when they went to the bathroom during class breaks. She also said he once wrote a note to the classmate in front of him saying that he didn't want to go to class and he wanted to die. The boy's aunt said the boy was recently reluctant to go to school and would often ask his grandfather for cash before he went. She said nobody in his family thought that was strange. They thought he might just want more money to buy some food. But now thinking back, it all feels a little bit strange because now in China, it's very rare to use cash. So the cash might have gone to the three suspects. So neither the family nor the school noticed that there was any signals of violence on this boy. This is not just an exceptional case in China. According to an investigation between 2020 and 2022, over 53% of students in schools have experienced bullying, but that includes all forms of bullying, such as verbal abuse. And over 13% of them is related to violence, so it's quite a common problem.
And it's also a very common problem in other countries as well. But on top of the school bullying problem, the three suspects and the victim appear to be this stay-at-home children or left-behind children, which means their parents work in a different city and only spend very few gatherings in a whole year with their children. And so this case has also drawn people's attention to the problem of this group of children again. And could this tragedy end differently if their parents were more around?
I believe the presence of their parents will definitely reduce the possibility of their children becoming victims or the offenders. In a study published in 2021, over 30% of left-behind children in rural areas reported recurrent bullying and victimization. That figure for rural children who live with their parents was over 20%. And at the same time, a white paper published by an intermediate court in Beijing a couple of years ago suggested that the lack of parental attention was a factor in the increasing numbers of young offenders they had seen. Now a lot of parents are leaving villages and leaving their children to go to cities to get better paid jobs, to provide a better material support for their children, which is good. But this has left a huge vacancy in their mental support. According to investigations, left-behind children would spend more time on smartphones because they can go to virtual communities and get connected with other people. But in the meantime, they're also exposed to the violent content. They may adore it and learn very quickly. And there's also research showing that in rural areas, children tend to be more addicted to video games, which also contains violent content. That's probably one of the reasons why the suspects are so poised and calm after the killing of the boy, because they are already used to such violent scenes. And the education from their grandparents can be quite simple. There's a huge digital gap between these two generations. So even if their grandparents know that their children are using their phones to do something that are not good for themselves, the grandparents may not effectively stop them from doing it. Now there's a huge demand for migrant workers in soaring cities. And now in China, there are tens of millions of left-behind children, according to the latest population census. And it's never wrong to provide better material life. But who's going to fill the vacancy in their mental life? It's definitely not violence. And this is one of the questions left by the gruesome killing of the left-behind boy by the 3 left-behind children.
So the absence of parenting is definitely a main reason to the crime. But perhaps in this modern time, when our online contents, games are filled with violence, we probably need to learn how to balance this information and our future generation.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining, Hongyu.
Thank you for having me.
This month marks the commencement of the 4th year since the establishment of the juvenile court under China's Supreme People's Court in 2021. With this case capturing national attention, the verdict on the offenders is poised to exert influence extending well beyond the village and the province. Earlier on Friday, Prosecutor General Yin Yong reiterated the nation's commitment to a legal system intolerant of crimes against minors. If the crime meets the criteria for prosecution, criminal liability will be pursued. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Deep Dive. If you enjoyed what you just heard, don't forget to follow us on your podcast platform. Just search for Deep Dive. You can also leave comments to let us know what you want to learn about China and beyond. This episode is brought to you by me, Li Yunqi, and my colleagues Zhang Zhang and Qi Zhi. Special thanks to CGTN Radio reporter Dou Hongyu. I'll see you in the next one.